Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, I'm Jackie Kirshen. You are about to listen to the Dork Forest. Let's give you the info about it. First of all, you know the websites. dorkforest.com, thedorkforest.com. If you like a determiner, JackieKation.com has everything. All of my podcasts, including videos of my stand-up schedule, merchandise you can purchase if you would like, and a lot more info than you possibly even need. Let's do the credits. Myq Kaplan sang and produced and composed that song at the beginning of the show. He sang with his wife, Sarah. It's very beautiful. At the end of the program, he sings his version of the Mexican hat dance. That's Myq Kaplan. Vilmos fixes JackieKation.com. He is the web designer over there. And Patrick Brady fixes the audio. And in this case, there's a video intro. Very exciting. Anyway, those are the websites. If you want to support the show, you're doing it already by listening to it or watching it. And another way is to tell your friends and family, go on iTunes, do a review. Another way is to just give me money. Yeah. You could go use the donate button. You can make it even monthly if you're okay with making things monthly. You do a PayPal monthly. There's a monthly choice on PayPal. The PayPal is a button on the Jackie Kirshen or the Dork Forest website, and it goes directly to me. Thank you very much. I will use it wisely or foolishly. Your call as well. Now, my email address, jackie@JackieKation.com, is where you can contact me if you have any questions or concerns and about the Dork Forest. And I do have a Venmo account. It's Jackie-Kirshen, oddly enough. Another way to support the show is on dorkforest.com and JackieKation.com. There's an Amazon link. And the Amazon link just takes you to Amazon. You order like normal, and it supports the show because you came from Jackie Kirshen or dorkforest.com. Very exciting. Other than that, there is a Bandcamp. You can, if you have listened to all the episodes that are free and you need more content, there are several live episodes that are at thedorkforest.bandcamp.com. And those cost me a couple of bucks, so I charge a couple of bucks. There's also a storytelling album there that you can listen to some stories that I did live. And there are 17 free episodes before the Dork Forest was pre-recorded. So the audio isn't very good, but the guests were super funny and fun and dorky. So if you want to do that, go to thedorkforest.bandcamp.com. Other than that, let's see if there are other things that I should be talking about. Possibly the merch. Yeah, if you want to buy merch. The only other thing I want to talk about is the merch. You can get Dork Forest t-shirts, and you can get stand-up comedy t-shirts. You can get my albums or my DVD over at JackieKation.com/merch. There's pins, there's a challenge coin, there's a bunch of new things happening over there. Anyway, a lot of information. I don't think I've missed anything, but who cares? Let's get into the show. Hey, it's Jackie Kirshen. I am in a tiny room in my home, and we're going to try something new. It's a Zoom, but not. So here's what I literally am going to tell this story, gentlemen, before I allow the introductions to begin. And here it is. Myq Kaplan asked, hello, and welcome to the show, Myq Kaplan.
Thank you.
There we go. At Myq Kaplan, MYQ. Myq Kaplan called and said, hey, I have a new album coming out May 8th, which is going to be called A.K.A. And I'd love to do the Dork Forest. And I have an idea what that'll be about, which is advice columns. Literally the day before Matt Kirshen. Welcome to the program, Matt Kirshen.
Hey, Jackie Kirshen. Hey, Myq Kaplan.
Hello.
At Matt Kirshen, MattKirshen, and at Matt_Kirshen on Instagram, said, I could do the Dork Forest about advice columns. And I'm like, what? What's happening? No one's ever done a Dork Forest about advice columns. So
can we, I even want to slightly correct that story, even more specific, because we were having a little Zoom hangout a few days ago. As you've been good about organizing these, I think we've been trying to all do that kind of thing while we're all confined to our homes as a substitute for actually seeing people face to face. and you asked whether anyone wanted to do a dork forest and what your dorkdoms were, and I was like, nah, I can't really think of anything good. And then my fiance Harley went, "You're always reading advice columns. Whenever I look at your computer, there's a fairly good chance you're reading one. You could do that."
So Holly knew what your dorkdom was, and you did not. And then a day later, Myq Kaplan knew what your dorkdom was, and it was him. And he said that he had some advice for you.
Oh, hang on a second. Sorry to interrupt. I just got an alert that my GarageBand recording has stopped.
Oh.
Well, start it again.
Which is worrisome.
Don't be worried.
Shall I do another? Do we want to do another
Just
time?
start it again, and we'll figure it out, because we are recording the Zoom.
That's cool. Do you want to do another time.is clap as well, just for safety?
No, but you do, and I love you. So we're going to totally do that.
Okay.
At the 15-second mark. Is that too soon?
I'm ready if you are.
I wasn't ready.
Okay,
Let's do
that.
One at 25.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. So here's what I don't know anything about. Advice columns. Who wants to start?
Well, Matt, I guess I'm curious what advice columns you read. I'll start by just saying a few of the ones that I read and or listen to, the podcast version of, are Dan Savage's Savage Love or the Savage Love Cast, the Dear Prudence column and podcast on Slate. Captain Awkward is just a written, I don't think there is a podcast version of it. I've been reading Nick Cave's The Red Hand Files lately.
Oh, that's one I didn't even know about.
Oh, yeah. And Dan Ariely, who wrote Predictably Irrational and The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, social scientist, he has a column that comes out where he offers people sort of like logical, like statistics-based advice. So those are a few of mine to start with.
Okay, you've got a greater breadth than I do. I will say Savage Love, I used to read every week religiously when it was in the AV Club, and then the AV Club did a big site redesign, and it became substantially harder to find, and I got annoyed and stopped doing it. So it turns out my dorkdom is not so adamant and vast and necessary that a slight amount of website navigation won't put me off.
But what are you reading and listening
but
and watching?
I will also sometimes load up his podcasts if I have long car journeys ahead of me. I'm a big fan of the Dear Prudence podcast, particularly, and we can get into this later, but it took a while to adjust to the new Prudence, and now I prefer current Prudence to previous Prudence.
Sure.
No offense to Emily Yoffie. I did not know about Nick Cave's. Andrew W.K. had one for a bit that I would read from time to time, and that was fun. And then also, I will occasionally, but I have to ration myself on this because it's so vast and unending that it could be my day gone. But on the amateur side of advice columns, there is a wealth of subreddits on the reddit.com internet website, headed up by, I say, the beast of all of them, which is the Am I the Asshole?
Oh, yeah. I see Am I the Asshole pop up on Twitter once in a while, or other advice columns will link to these. But yeah, here's the thing that I had a conversation about this with my girlfriend who I live with, Rini, and she, like your partner, Matt, reminded me about some things with respect to me. She told me about some of my things to bring up, which is that I am a kind of completist in that, like you, Matt, said you will sometimes load up some podcasts to listen to if you have a drive.
Yeah.
I have listened to every Dan Savage Lovecast episode except for the last couple because I haven't had any drives recently, but I will walk out in the park and listen. I will listen at home if I need to. It is such a nice thing to do while driving because you're like doing one thing with your sight and another thing with your sound. It feels very efficient. But that's one reason why I also won't start too many other podcasts or go into the realm of a world that's almost unfinished non-finishable because I do want to complete everything. Like I do get emails from Slate if every week or more than once a week or however often they come, letting me know of new Dear Prudence podcasts and written episodes, columns, as it were. And so I have if I don't have time to read it then, I'll put a tab on it. And so I have a folder in my email for Prudies to read. So I will read all of them over the course of my life until I die. So yeah, don't worry about me. I'm fine with enough advice columns until I die.
See, this is the danger with Reddit, is because if you then get too deep into that, that's like trying to finish Wikipedia. It's just, you could be in a whole world of trouble if you like I did again today. There was a am I being unreasonable that popped up on Twitter, and I linked to it, and then that was an hour gone of going through the back catalog, and I was like, I need to stop this right now.
So I have a quick question. So these are not Dear Abby. Like it's Dear Abby, but it's a Dear Abby for the 21st century. So there's columns, but there's also podcasts, and then there's Reddit threads. Are there also posts? What's happening?
Yeah. Well, Reddit's a kind of I think Reddit is advice column adjacent, where like Reddit in general, like things on the internet in general, this is rather than going to one author to get their opinion, and maybe sometimes augmented by guest opinion, which advice columnists will sometimes do. They'll be like, hey, this is a bit out of my depth, so I went to this doctor or this psychologist or whatever, and this is their advice. But this is someone putting it out to the internet. It's often on Reddit. There is one a similar one called Am I Being Unreasonable, which is on the British Mumsnet website that I used to read every so often for fun because partly the questions were ludicrous, and then Mumsnet has recently devolved into a den of transphobia, and so I'm kind of done with that website. But it's and also arguably the people at Mumsnet who are now in the den of transphobia will be like, well, it's not for you, you're a male non-mum. But fuck, that was a fun one. Apologies for the swear word just then.
Swear it up.
But yeah, I'd say the Reddit thing is a different thing that touches on the same thing, because that's more crowdsourced advice, where someone will write in with their story, and sometimes wanting to be proved right, and sometimes genuinely like, hey, was I in the wrong here? But often they're hoping to be told, no, you weren't, man. You should have said that to them.
Mike?
Yes. I will also add, I don't know if y'all are familiar with A.J. Jacobs. He wrote The Year of Living Biblically, which is a wonderful, funny, fascinating book where he does these things that some might call, I think, shtick lit, where he followed every rule of the Bible for a year. He read the Britannica for a year, or Drop Dead Healthy, where he tried to get every month he focused on a different body part to get it as healthy as possible for the course of 2 years. And so he has all these cool projects, and one of them was a crowdsourced advice column where I think on Facebook he would get questions and put it to, however many thousands and thousands of fans he had, and then he would compile the best answers. And another thing like that is the site Quora, which I don't go to all the time, but I still get emails from.
How do you spell that?
Quora. It's like a question forum.
Right. Quora, I will find myself on just if I ask a question of the internet, Quora is often the first Google result that comes back. But that's any kind of advice. Like, it's not just that isn't just like, hey, what should I do about my relationship? That's people asking like, is this battery better than this battery? Or is like,
Consumer Reports.
Or like, why do people hate this politician? Or it'll be stuff like, there'll be questions like that, and someone will jump on and explain if the answer is to that person.
If you're looking to get into reading advice columns, Quora, I think, ought not be your first
stop.
It's too fast. Yeah.
I have remembered a few others. By the way, The Guardian has one. I'm trying to remember which newspaper in the UK has one that's written by Pamela Stevenson, who is comedian, sketch comic, and Billy Connolly's wife turned psychologist and columnist. But that's one I enjoy, partly because I often very vehemently disagree with her advice. But
what are the qualifications of these people? Do they have any?
Can I?
Often next to nothing. No, it's just one person's opinion.
I will say what Dan Savage says when people sometimes he'll have other advice columnists on his podcast for I think a segment that he calls like Second Opinion, and they'll each tackle the same question, sometimes questions in his wheelhouse, which is more like sex and relationship advice. And if they don't do that, there's a funny, they do a good job. But the reason sometimes he'll have just comedians on and they'll be like, what qualifies me to give advice? And he's like, what qualified me? And he gives like the definition from some dictionary is just like an opinion on what someone should or shouldn't do. Or it's basically just like the only qualification you need to give advice is that someone asked you for advice, which, which is a good...
And you've built up a wealth of... You've done it enough times and for so long that people have read your column and then thought, hey, I agree with this person's opinion enough to then send that person my letter. Slate has a few other columnists as well that also are advice columns as well. So it's not just the Dear Prudence column. They also have one called Care and Feeding and one called Ask a Teacher. And they're all essentially advice columns, but with slightly more specific remits.
There's also Ask a Manager. I know the Ask a Manager person gets like cited. Like they all kind of, it seems like the way that comedians know each other. I feel like advice columnists, I don't know if they have like festivals or anything like we do, like Just for Laughs advice column style. But I do think that like Ann Landers and Dear Abby were sort of like, like Die Hard as to action movies as those folks are to advice columns. I think Dan Savage even purchased, I think, Dear Abby's desk. And so he writes from her desk. And the way that he conceived his column to begin with was originally kind of a joke where he's like, I'm gay and there haven't been gay advice columnists. So when gay people have written in to the straight advice columnists, they would get not the best, answers sort of curated for them. It would be like straight people sometimes berating gay people. So he's like, I want to berate straight people. So, but then it kind of got serious. And he's like, well, I guess if people are actually coming to me with information, I will offer them information. And I think he is also somebody who is good, certainly now, at having guests. If somebody asks a question about camming, he'll have like a cam person on. Or if somebody asks about a trans issue, he'll have a trans person on too as a guest.
Second opinion.
A question of race. He'll have, like, I know various comedians, like, I think he's quoted like Joel Kim Booster when there was an issue that came up about something relating to an Asian something or other. And
I will say this about Dan Savage is that the only reason I know his name is I think I've seen his name around, but the only interaction I had with him is someone sent him, I think it was Audible, had one of my bits, and it was this bit about how Andy explaining that I didn't have any expectations of him as a boyfriend, and then me telling him what my expectations were, and then him saying back that those were roommate expectations and not boyfriend expectations. And then so that Audible played that joke for Dan Savage, and then Dan Savage was like, well, those are actually, and he got kind of serious, and he was like, those are actually how relationships should work. And I was like, did you miss the joke part of that? Yes, I'm actually quite happy with the roommate expectations, for they are also real. But that's the only thing I know about Dan Savage. I wanted to ask each of you, Matt, let's go with you first. I love the fact that you both know what the hell each of you is talking about. It's kind of exciting for me.
I would say that, I mean, like, Dan Savage and also Dear Prudence are fairly mainstream columns. Like, I don't want
everybody...
Yeah, I don't want to, falsely represent that I'm like, oh, I know.
But you are.
You don't know you don't know who's the columnist for the Reading Evening News. You don't.
I've never even heard of Prudence. So.
It's By the way, fun little extra fact: in the UK, they're called agony aunts or uncles, and I don't believe there is currently a term for if there is a non-binary advice column.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, here's my question. What, Matt Kirshen, what are some of your favorite kinds of questions that are asked?
I will tell you my favorite category, or my favorite my favorite thing that happens in an advice column, and this also sort of tallies with what I was saying earlier about the subreddit. and I don't know what this says about me or what it is that I want to get out of an advice column, but far and away my favorite thing in any advice column is when someone writes in asking for advice and they get told that they are a bad person and they are the one who has entirely caused the situation and they need to apologize.
If I may jump in, that is, it's not the only thing I love, but that is 100%. There was, in fact, a Dan Savage, that was so beautiful. 'Cause he wrote it, if you only looked at the words without understanding, he was basically telling them sarcastically that they were doing everything right, but just in mirroring back what they had said because here's the thing is, when you're reading these, most people, even if the person is quote unquote in the wrong, if the person is less compassionate than the other person or hasn't thought from the other person's position or perspective, most people writing in are at least doing their best to make themselves appear to be the hero. And then once in a while, they will say things that we're like, how is the blind spot this big that this is what you're saying, and you think that the answer, they'll be like, how do I be the worst person? You're like, well, let me help you with that.
There's a fairly well-known Prudence one that they had a couple of years ago now that does the rounds fairly frequently about, and I'm sure Mike will have read it, about the person who was annoyed at children from poorer neighborhoods trick-or-treating coming to their neighborhood to trick-or-treat. And they were like, we live in a nice residential area. We're personally not super rich, but we do live in an area with a lot of wealthy people, and we've noticed that at Halloween, families from poorer neighborhoods have been bussing in, and we just think it's, this is the wrong thing. And that was a particularly fun one, because obviously, even the premise, right from the premise, you're like, they're gonna get a shit kicking.
Why did they write that down and put a stamp on it or email it? How did they? What was their process to say, I'm going to submit that? That's amazing.
They don't listen to or read enough advice column podcasts, and I will say that I call that the trickle down or treatle down economics problem, and it's. I will also just jumping back a little bit to the fact that Matt and I do have some of the same language and information about this world. It's kind of I can't say if it's an exact parallel, but imagine some people are comedy fans, and you might not be surprised to be like, oh, I've heard of Matt Kirshen and Jackie Cation and Myq Kaplan. Oh yeah, they all kind of know each other. They're comedians who've been doing it a while. But if somebody's not a comedy fan at all, they might know Kevin Hart. They might know only Jerry Seinfeld. But then they're like, I don't know who. We are the Dear Prudence and Dan Savages of comedy.
Because they're not hugely famous, but they are within that community hugely famous, right?
Yes, Dear Abby is Kevin Hart for sure, or Dane Cook. But yeah,
that's a fair point actually, because I don't read Dear Abby, but Dear Abby is the sort of archetypal. It
was my reference for sure.
Yeah.
Right. It's even though it's the one that's gone to, it's the sort of platonic ideal of advice column. It was the one that was syndicated across so many newspapers for so many years, and I'm sure, I don't know how many Dear Abbeys there's been. I think Dear Abby might have been passed down from the original Abby to her daughter, maybe?
Yes.
Am I right about that?
I believe that is so, a Gallagher 2 type situation, yes.
Also, I think the correct plural might have been Dear's Abbey rather than Dear Abbeys.
Passers-by.
Yeah.
Yes. If I may, one other column that I remember now, actually 2 from the New York Times. Roxane Gay had one in the New York Times for a little bit, or might still periodically. And then there's one weekly that I read there called The Ethicist, which has been different people over the years. Yes, Jackie?
Maria Bamford read that once, and it made her change how she paid people or something. It actually affected her life.
Maria Bamford once might have paid me more than she needed to because of that. Then I think I
Right,
opened for her once in New York and DC in a weekend, and they told me I would get a certain amount of money, and one of the places gave me some money, and the other place said Maria will pay you directly, and then Maria sent me a check for more money than both of the shows were supposed to be for, and I wrote to her and I was like, "Do you know that one of the shows paid me?" And she said yes.
Yeah, much of my income 3 years ago was entirely Maria Bamford, and she was paying me 3 times what she was because I have opened for Maria since 2001, when right before, I think it was right after her Burning Bridges album came out, which was called that because her agent sent her on the road, and when she had 30 minutes of material. And when at the end of that year, she had 45 tight, but in the beginning of that year, she did not, and there was trouble. But so in 2001, she was like, "I want to do the road, but could you come with?" And I said yes. And so we made an agreement, and it was back when she was only making low headline money, and I would get feature money, and then we would split the room. And we learned how to live in different corners of hotel rooms. It was quite nice. Anyway, but when she got the Lady Dynamite show, she was overpaying me. And Rangers of the Dork Forest have heard me talk about this like 3 times regular low headline money.
Oh, I think multiple people could do a Dork Forest where their dorkdom is the generosity of Maria Bamford.
For sure. And then when the Lady Dynamite didn't get renewed, she was like, "Oh, I don't think I can afford to bring you on the road anymore." And I said, "Or you could just pay me fair again and not overpay me." And she was like, "Oh, but I think you deserve that." And I said, and she kept saying that it was, she didn't know. And I was like, I would rather have some money than no money. And the second thing is, you're never getting that $100,000 back. How about that, Maria? And that sort of took her out of it. But I think she read that The Ethicist. What are they really just, is it money? Is it morality? What is it?
Yeah, I would say like sometimes it's like a professor writing in about something that they learned about a student or it could be a parent overheard something about their child's, identity that they're like, they didn't consent for me knowing this. And there's a huge range there. Like it's.
Yeah. It is more because it's the New York Times. I've read The Ethicist a bit, and it is very, as the title suggests, it's much less like, so they said this, and they said that, and what's the right thing to do? It's more like, well, what do you think is the morally justified? What would the philosophers say in this situation is the correct path?
The correct path.
This is not from an advice column, but this one thing that has changed my behavior from reading. This was actually an essay that Stephen Fry wrote, but it was it was a blog he wrote a while ago, and he mentioned a conversation he had with John Cleese that has affected how I deal with the public in a certain way. So he described a situation after some charity show that Stephen Fry and John Cleese were both on, and an audience member complimented him after the show, and he did that sort of abashed English, sort of like, well, yeah, like I was rubbish, I was terrible, you can't say that, blah, blah, And afterwards, John Cleese took him aside and said, "What you just did there was rude. You think you are being polite right now by playing down a compliment, but to approach a celebrity or approach anyone who's been performing takes a certain amount of bravery, and also they are giving their opinion on your art, and to then effectively negate that compliment is to tell them that they are bad at evaluating this art form, and what they did lacks value." And that really, like, that's something, because I know I've done that, and since then I'm far from celebrity, but I'm someone who is on stage and has performed and done these things and has people who tell me that they like my thing, and I've always remember from that moment on to take a compliment graciously, or even a non-performance compliment. I think the same is true if someone says, like, "I like that shirt," or whatever, like anything. To graciously take a compliment is a nicer thing to do to the compliment giver than to try to act to humble, to throw in some false or even genuine humility is ruder than to accept that compliment.
Can I agree 100%. And I learned that lesson from Jesse Joyce, the comedian who maybe some of us know.
I do know Jesse Joyce. Very funny.
He is a wonderful...
He's writing for Kimmel these days. He was writing for At Midnight, and he's one of those people who pops up on the credits for a lot of award shows as well.
Oh, that's
and roasts and such.
And so, yeah, he's a joke beast.
He used to travel with Geraldo back when that was more fortunately possible.
Which I think that's how he got into the world of the roasts as well.
Yeah.
I think Geraldo brought him on as like, hey, this guy's really good at giving you jokes.
And his name is Jesse Joyce?
Jesse Joyce.
Okay, everybody look for that guy because he sounds great.
Yes. So he, years ago, we'd been to a festival or two together. We were friendly acquaintances, not the closest friends, but very friendly. And I had just taped my half-hour Comedy Central special in 2009. And I think I saw him a little bit after, and he said, hey, something probably simply as, congratulations on your special. How did it go? And I heard that, and then I probably hemmed and hawed for a long time. And like the short answer is it went well. And the longer answer for like personal friends would have been like, oh, there were a few moments where I was like a little nervous or I stumbled my words, but they said you could go back and edit. So I did that. And actually it was a little more even endearing to the audience because then they felt like they were in on this thing. And I think it turned out like probably the best possible. So those mistakes. And then I feel like Jesse waited patiently for however long that was. And then at the end said, you know, you could just say thanks. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're totally right. And then I talked for another 10 minutes and then just said thanks. So 100%. Yeah. Jackie?
Well, those are things to learn, too. I mean, and have you learned anything, Myq Kaplan, from an actual advice column that you were doing incorrectly?
Great question.
Is that common enough?
I will say, first, I'll also say one time when I met Dan Savage, just on this topic, I saw him do like a book reading and I went up to him to have it signed. And I said to him something like, you are like a hero of mine. And he did the thing that we've learned not to do. And he was like, oh, you need better heroes. And so I do think that one of the hardest things to do in life in general, or especially when it comes to like knowing what to do or knowing what others ought do, is even if you have a clear mind of like what other people, what would be best to do, what you would do if you were them, it's so difficult to apply that in your own life. So one thing that I do sort of like meta, like in general, is if I have advice for someone, I think, oh, am I doing that? Can I apply myself to that? Like, I think even just having the idea, the name of Am I the Asshole, be like to really consider like, is it possible that it's me? Because I think I was raised by a culture, a society, a family who like, you know, centered my, you know, straight white male, me experience. And so like I would go into things being like, surely I can't be the asshole, which is the most asshole-ish thing.
Right. And I think we're all blinkered when it comes to that, because it's very, as evidenced by the number of people who will write into a Prudence or a Savage or whatever and then be berated. Like people who've read these columns for years and then will just go like, I need to know how to deal with this neighbor of mine. And they will go, well, the way you deal with this neighbor of yours is to send them a bunch of flowers and apologize profusely for what you said to their kids.
That's awesome.
I will, before we get further on to things that I've learned, which I hope that I will come up with, but to answer other kinds of questions that I like sometimes they will be questions about weddings and sometimes there'll be questions about birthdays. And so I feel like this happens in Prudence a lot, to the point where Daniel M. Lavery, who is Dear Prudence these days, will not probably print as many as he gets, but every once in a while, it's like a grown-up person who is upset that other grown-up people are not making the same large amount of deal that they would like them to make for their birthday, sometimes without them having even been told that they would like them to make this large amount of deal. And
wow.
Or it's the other one where it's like their sibling and they're the one writing in going like, my sister just blew up because I name my child the same thing that her childhood toy is,
exactly.
you've stolen. There's a lot of name stealing. That comes up a lot in Prudence for some reason. People seem to think that the number of times that Prudence and or other columnists have to be like, name stealing is not a thing, and you can't reserve a name that you hadn't actually told anyone you wanted to, and now your second cousin has chosen that name for their daughter.
Similarly, every once in a while, I think this might have been one recently, is I got engaged 3 years ago, and we had a very long engagement planned, and we have our wedding date set for 2 years from now. But then, in the meantime, a year later, my sister got engaged, and they set the wedding for before ours. So
yep, and now she's stealing my moment.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's banana land.
So there is a certain, I think, in general, some of the pleasure from reading these columns. There is definitely a certain amount of smug superiority that you get to have reading this. Like, and I should check my, I won't deny that there's not just from the one where they get told that they're asshole, but then sometimes you're like, holy crap! So your boss said that. There is a certain amount of, the same joy that people get out of watching reality shows, where obviously they've cherry-picked the moment where this person is being absurdly unreasonable, or there's a moment of big drama, or even, there are really heartwarming ones, or really sad ones. It's the same as, I think, the joy people get out of reality TV, where it does run through the whole spectrum or various spectra of human emotions, and people needing to be comforted, or people needing just to be reassured.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, I will add, I think this is something that I have learned not only from advice columns and not necessarily from a specific one, but in life with my girlfriend and I were having a conversation. Sometimes I will read a Dear Prudence out loud to her. We'll discuss what our answers would be, and then we'll read. And sometimes it's like, I have no idea what I would do in this situation, and I'm very glad that I am not the person that they're coming to, though.
That's definitely some of the other. Yeah, that's definitely another pleasure from the column, is like you read the question, and it's almost like, it's like puzzle time now. It's like, okay, hit pause. I'm going to think about my answer, and then I'll turn to the back page of the puzzle book to see if I was right.
And one of the things that is valuable for me to remember is that in our own lives, we can only, if we can control anything, we can control our own actions, our own perspective, our own impressions, if anything, if we can do that. We can't make
At
somebody
best.
else. You certainly can't marionette, ventriloquist somebody else into doing what you want. Whereas sometimes people ask the question of like, what can I do to make this person behave reasonably? And very often the answer is that can't be the goal or the question. Like sometimes the question, like in Captain Awkward a lot, there'll be questions about like family, family of origin, chosen family, biological versus logical, and being like, my parents treat me like this whenever I talk to them or see them. What do I do? And sometimes the answer is like, well, maybe talk to them and see them less, or tell them if they talk to you like that, then you will hang up the phone or leave the room or leave the house. And so for me, it's remembering, like in my own life, if somebody else does something. My girlfriend sort of brought this to me. It's like, if it's raining outside, you can, and you have to go outside, or if you're outside and it's raining, if you have an umbrella, great. If you don't, you're getting wet, and you can either be, however you feel about it, you can be upset, but you can't make it not be raining by being upset.
Right.
And so if somebody comes to me for advice, or if somebody comes to an advice column, sort of like, I guess it's like porn in a way that maybe you're like, ooh, it's like point of view. Like now I'm the advice columnist for a second, but not really. Like the mess is somewhere else for real. But it's addressing, like, there might be so many characters in the story, but really the only person, like, to focus on is the person asking the question and what they can do, what they can say, what they can reasonably expect, like how they can adjust their behavior regardless of, like, not worrying about the outcome. Like, hopefully you'll get the outcome that you want, but you get to decide what you do in your own life regardless of what the outcome is going to be, because you can't control what other people are going to do or how they react.
So do you think that that's a through line for every single advice column, is just like, you actually can't change the actions of someone else? You have to only change your own reaction to that?
I don't know. I'm not sure I agree that that's the through line for all of them, but it's definitely a common theme, is that, like, sometimes you can change your behavior or your reaction and fix it, and sometimes it is just like I'm really sorry you're in this situation. You're not the one in the wrong, but you're just going to have to suck it up for a while. Like, for example, if sometimes there'll be a sort of a kid who is LGBTQ or something and is stuck living with their parents still, and sometimes the advice just has to be, look, I think you might have to stay semi-closeted right now or something like that until you can get to safety or until you can get to financial independence. Sometimes there is advice along those lines, and it's more of just a kind of reassurance of, like, we're here for you and there are resources for you, but stay strong in the meantime. It gets better
kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. Which
is, by the way, started by Dan Savage and his husband. It gets better movement.
And sometimes Dan will, sometimes the advice is, I wish you hadn't had done that. Like, somebody will write in and be like, so I had a kid with a person, we got married, and they are treating me in this way. And we're like, oh, well, I wish you could go back 5 years, not do all of that, but,
and not have
moving
done that.
Forward. Yeah.
Totally. Another situation I can think of as well, where they have to kind of suck it up, is sometimes it... Sorry, go for it. I was just going to say, or if they're stuck in a job that it's too difficult to find a new job or leave right now, but something horrible has happened with their boss. And again, it's often the same advice of, like, this sucks, your boss is a bad person, but right now you're just going to have to keep coming to work and then offloading on your friends later, and just stay strong. I'm sorry.
I see a certain number of themes, though, which is kind of interesting, because it's not all... It's not all, my sister-in-law is a pain in the ass, but it can be that. And it's not, and the answers are not by rote. They're not stock. They get more personal than I think.
Yeah.
I thought that they weren't quite so attentive. I like how attentive that they seem to be.
Yeah, I think so. I think the better writers are, and it's one of the reasons I'm a fan of, I think the current Dear Prudence, for example, because I think Daniel is just a very empathetic person, but also very witty. He was one of the co-founders of The Toast, if you ever read that website.
Yeah, I did.
And he went by another name back then. He's a trans man.
Okay.
But it's witty and smart writing as well, but also quite empathetic and thoughtful. I will say one of my favorite is a weird word for this particular letter, because it was a very sad letter, but it was a Savage Love letter of the day from a few years back, where a gay woman who had been expelled by her very religious Baptist family, basically cast out just on the day of her graduation, and was writing for help because her parents or her family, her aunt and uncle, had summoned her back to the family. She was thinking there might be some kind of reconciliation, and in fact, it was, here is a gay nephew, take him. And it was this woman writing to Dan Savage, going like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to cope. I've made my own life, and I've made my peace with the fact that this is not my family anymore, but now this broke me, seeing the hate in these people, and there's a kid who's relying on me. And that one, Dan's response was, I think with her permission, was to just open up the comments on this letter to have a bunch of people reassure her and just tell her that she's an awesome person and give her strength. And some other people wrote in with some practical advice as well about the legal
Right.
situation about like, hey, you can claim child support and you can do these certain legal things that. But mostly it was just people just giving a person going through a very hard time some moral support, and it was very heartwarming and also sad at the same time.
Yeah, that I like that the comments are often a thing. Like there's a community associated with a lot of these advice columns. Like sometimes Captain Awkward will be like, in this, like maybe there'll be an issue where a mental disorder is discussed, but that's not the main issue of the thing. So they'll be like, in the comments, like only focus on this, don't focus on this, don't be like, what about this? And sometimes they'll close the comments completely under certain circumstances, but sometimes they'll be open, and sometimes I think every week Dan releases like a letter of the day where it's just like all responses to last week's letters and last week's podcast, where people often like are like, that was good, but also I'd say this, or you missed the mark on this, or like at the end of every one of his podcasts as well, he has people call in and they'll be like, I was actually in that situation, and I think this would be a valuable thing that this person could use. Maybe you don't know about this resource or this other option.
And Prudence also has that, because Prudence, the column is done initially as a live chat for the members. And so sometimes that will be people, like the later letters will be someone going like, read this letter, you might want to reconsider this. And there'll be a certain amount of like, oh yeah, I missed that in the actual question, or that's good extra information. Or Prudence will open it up to people going, hey, does anyone else have any take on this? Because I have never been a school janitor and I don't know what the etiquette is here, or whatever the specific situation is.
Can I tell you guys, or y'all, that I used to, what do I want to say? I know two people who have written letters to Dan Savage that were in either the column or the podcast. One of them is my friend, comedy, non-stand-up comedian, but previous stand-up comedian and current improv and actor human being, Myq Sherman, very funny guy, good friend of mine. He had written in a time to Dan Savage saying that I think he had a ground floor apartment in New York and he was having sex with a girlfriend at the time, and they had not closed their shades, and there was somebody across the way that was just looking in at them, and he was basically like, hey, like, shouldn't that guy not do that? Isn't that guy being like a weird creepo? And Dan was basically like, close your shades, you're in New York City. Like, even if, and this is a situation where, Myq is not like ethically in the wrong, he's just practically speaking, what he can control is his own curtains as opposed to that other person's actions.
Yes.
And then about 5 years ago, I was dating a woman who lived at the time in her mother's home, and I stayed with her overnight once. And months later, a call came in and I was like, is that my girlfriend's voice? And it was about how in the middle of the night, I think we had been having sex, and her mother like walked into the room and then walked out of the room, and we weren't sure if she had been asleep and sleepwalking or if she had not been doing that. And like then neither of them had referenced it the next day. And I think my girlfriend at the time was like, should I bring it up to her? And Jackie, you're not of the advice column world, but I see on the Zoom video that you were shaking your head no, which is the correct answer. No need to bring it up.
Need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bananas. I have to say that I had an apartment with, I don't know if you know, Jennifer McLean used to do stand-up comedy, married now to Aaron Lee, who is head writer of, I think... He was head writer, I think, of Family Guy for a while. I may be wrong. I don't have everybody's IMDb in front of me. But anyway, Jennifer McLean was my roommate for several years when I first moved to Los Angeles. And we would have movie nights some nights, and we would invite over comics, and we would watch a movie. And one night we invited a bunch of people over, and we lived sort of in a giant bunk bed of a studio where there were essentially two rooms, but there was no wall. And it was a giant, her room was up high, my room was down low, and then there was a staircase that went up, and there were two bathrooms. It's a great story. Anyway, the thing is we were on the second floor. Look in, and you could stand outside and look. It was an open courtyard, kind of Melrose Place kind of thing. Uh-huh. And there was the guys, we hadn't set up the movie yet. They were standing kind of on the porch outside of the apartment and looking down. And then one of them came in, and then all three of them came out. And then one of them came back in and said, "Hey, your neighbor is masturbating down there with her curtains open. Let's watch that for a while." And so we all stood and watched her until she finished, and then we watched a movie. Anyway, you should always close your curtains, unless, in her case, I think she was excited. She just had one show a night, though. There, just so everyone knows. Anyway, we're doing great, by the way. Let me reintroduce the fact that I am speaking with Matt Kirshen, who, as you may know, from his voice, is from the UK. And it is at Matt Kirshen. Kirshen is with a K, K-A-R-S-H-E-N. He has a podcast called Probably Science, and that is probably available on all of the platforms that podcasts are available, Matt Kirshen?
I'd say so. I think we've got most of them down.
All right, so
you can start with one of the episodes featuring either Jackie Kirshen or Myq Kaplan.
Oh, there you go. It'll be quite a circle. At Matt Kirshen on Twitter and at Matt_Kirshen on Instagram. Myq Kaplan is not from the UK. He is from the United States of America. Myq is spelled M-Y-Q, K-A-P-L-A-N, and it is at Myq Kaplan on both Twitter and Instagram. On May 8th, he has a new album out called A.K.A. That is an acronym, and it is available for pre-order, I think now, right? April
17th, yes.
Okay.
So if it's after that, it's available.
After that, there you go. Now, here's my next question regarding advice columns. Now, it's game showy.
Oh, yeah.
So we've heard about some heartwarming ones. We've heard about some dum-dums. Is there a third category that I'm not remembering? I think there is.
I think there's a bunch of categories. Those are sort of two general ones. So there's the easily fixed ones, I think, where it like often, I think Prudence particularly has this one where quite often it's just someone writing in because they want a lead on how to say something to someone. It's almost like it'll be kind of...
Say that again because you froze up a little bit, Matt.
I said sometimes they'll write in just because they need a lead on how to talk to someone. It'll be more like, can you give me a script to say this to this person? Like, what is a way to say to my coworker that I would like this behavior to change, or that this thing, or to stop this thing? And quite often it's as simple as that. It's just like, hey, here is one to do. Quite often it's one that does come up as a recurring theme, I think particularly for Prudence, is people keep saying this rude thing to me, and what's a thing to say to them in this situation?
Okay.
Like I don't have children. How do I, or I have a distinctive hairstyle and people need to comment on it or something. And what do I say? And sometimes the advice is just like pause for a while and let them sit in their discomfort, or just give them a kind of what a curious thing to say.
Yeah, or if it's like a lesbian couple with a baby, and they might get the question like, "How'd you get that baby?" Which might be very personal question. Be like, "Which one of your bodies did something?" Like with somebody's like,
"Do we know each other?"
Yeah. Whose was the spunk? Describe.
So I think that I think it's like a spectrum, and I would also add I don't know if this is a category, but like the idea of a reasonable person in like unreasonable circumstances. Like, what do I do? How do I do it? Maybe we've touched upon this, like a person who maybe can't leave their home because they're underage and don't have their own money stream, but it's a almost unlivable situation, or a roommate situation where the roommates are being unreasonable, but everybody is on the lease. And how do I, or what can I do? And sometimes it is just that people want there to be an answer that makes everyone happy, as opposed to, be like, how do I do the perfect thing? Or what can I, like, what's the magic thing to say? When sometimes the thing is to just accept that there will not be a situation a resolution that makes everyone happy, but that it's not. Sometimes it's the advice is it's not your job to make everyone happy. It's your job, hopefully, to be kind to everyone, respectful to everyone, including yourself. And then sometimes that might involve setting boundaries with people that seem like they could be reasonable people. Sometimes it's like a woman. I don't mean to make it all gendered, but very frequently, based on the dynamics of gender in our society, frequently there could be a woman talking about a man who might be talking to her more than she wants to be, like at work, or they go to the same coffee shop and she's like, I don't want to hurt his feet. I don't want to make him uncomfortable. And then I feel like the Dan Savage answer, or any of their answers, is basically like, well, he's making you uncomfortable. So you can at least undo that, extract yourself from that, and don't worry about making him uncomfortable. Worry about extracting yourself from the discomfort. And if that also makes him uncomfortable, that like sometimes it's like, hey, maybe he doesn't know. So maybe just be like, hey, can you not do that thing? And like a reasonable person would be like, oh, I had no idea that the thing that I was doing was a thing not to do. My bad. So sorry.
I would even say that what Myq just said, that last bit is another category of letters that comes up a lot, which is someone writing in to express their annoyance about something that they have never bothered to try to communicate to the relevant person that it is annoying. They're like, how do I make this person stop doing this? And you're like, well, one thing you could do is mention to them that is behavior that you have found disconcerting.
That is your least favorite kind of behavior. How about you use your words and go,
or
hey,
just
you
like,
know what I don't enjoy?
And there are ways to like, hey, you know what? It would really help me out if you could just eat that in the break room rather than at your desk.
Yeah. And if you could not make fish in the communal microwave, that'd be great.
When I was in college, I was a resident assistant, and some of the we did like a lot of roommate conflict role playing, in advance in training be like, oh, if roommates come to you with an issue. And I feel like the classic, almost unsolvable issue is like my roommate likes to stay up late and they make noise and have the light on, and I like to go to sleep early. And then the roommate's like, but I like to sleep in and they make noise in the morning. And it's just like, nobody is wrong. Nobody is like incorrect in like knowing who they are and how they want to live their lives. And the best answer would be just, well, maybe you hopefully don't have to live together forever. And maybe
you can pair up with someone whose circadian rhythm is more closely aligned with yours next year. But yeah, exactly that. Like sometimes on the Am I the Asshole subreddit, people vote, and there's a bot that tallies up the votes eventually, and it sort of gives it a rating. And I think there are 5 categories of things you can vote, which each have their initialisms, and it's just like YTA for you're the asshole. Like there's not the asshole. No assholes here, or everyone sucks here. Or more info needed, which is quite a common one.
Right, because the way we all spin it. I know that someone was saying to me, a friend of mine was saying that she had a friend. So this is like 2 degrees of whatever. They said that in our current situation where we're all sort of quarantined, right, and we're all hunkered down and waiting it out, that they wake up in fear sometimes, that they're super scared, and they're like, I wake up and I'm scared and I want to fix it. I'm like, well, you can't live in fear, so I got to fix this fear. I have to figure out how to not be in fear. And through the conversation she was having with her friend, she said, I had to realize that you can't fix or make fear go away. The only thing you can do is to let it go, is to process it, and
yes,
and the only way
or at least learn to live with it, which is also the advice for the 2 roommates at college who have different body clocks. It's just like sometimes you have to accept that it'll be there and learn that will be a part of your life for a certain amount of time.
Right, and then just do the next indicated thing, right? I mean, you can't, don't let it paralyze you. Just sort of accept it and sort of let it go as something that you can't control. You were powerless over, essentially.
I have thought of another category of letter, by the way,
yes,
which does come up from time to time, which is the fake letter that someone has written in that either gets passed and passes by the filters and judgments and ends up being responded to as if it were genuine, or being called out as an obvious fake. I think Dan Savage gets more than his fair share of those because he writes again about sex and adult relationships. And there's someone like, this happened and this happened. It's like, nope, that's not how dogs won't lick that. That's not like, it's just, you are trying to get your rocks off by writing to me about this or some. But then I can't remember whether it's Dan or Prudence or one of them will, if taken in by a fake, will reply with, well, one person's hypothetical is another person's reality. So it's still of interest and value to reply to this situation, even if it turns out that this person has conned or faked this specific letter.
Right, because it's just a theory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so much of almost everyone who reads or listens to an advice columnist or podcast, almost everyone who's in the audience is not the person who asked the question.
Right.
In fact, there's no guarantee that the person who asked the question is even getting the answer, except for the times that they write back in and they're like, thank you, or the times
that's another one we missed is the follow-up. I'm a big fan of the follow-up.
Oh, yeah. Like Dan Savage sometimes will call people to get more information or to have, so he'll have a conversation with them on the podcast as opposed to just they leave a message and then he gives his answer. But regardless of whether the person I always hope that the person who asked the question gets the answer that they want. But unless they're as completist as everyone else, maybe they won't know that their answer was even on the podcast or in the column that week. But not that it doesn't matter, but it has a greater purpose, the same way that, if we watch a comedian, you watch Mike Birbiglia talk about his wife or his girlfriend at the time or his ex, you don't have to be him to glean wisdom and resonance in your, oh, that's a relationship story that makes sense to me because it reminds me of my own life or, offers me these lessons that I can use moving forward. And so, similarly here, there might be literal lessons offered by these advice columnists that if we read them and we internalize them, then if we have anything near that situation come up in our own lives, I know so many people who listened to Dan Savage and then, shifted at least something in their understanding of how to be a better communicator in their relationship, how not to take monogamy as necessarily a default status quo that is never to be talked about, never to be brought up because it's just the way that it is, that's the thing with so many people who are writing in and they're like, can you believe that these other people don't know exactly how I like things without being told? It's just, it all fosters communication with others and introspection within self, I feel.
And even if you're not getting that out of it, it's also just like with fiction, it's a dip into another world. You don't have to specifically identify with any individual character in a book or a movie or a TV show to be able to enjoy that TV show. Or you don't need to go, what's the takeaway message of this show? It could also just be no, I like spending a while in the world of these characters. Again, the same thing people get out of any reality TV.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I have this to say. First of all, we are very close to an hour, gentlemen. So you've done vital work here. This has been fascinating to listen to you talk back and forth about the same dorkdom. Anyway, but have either of you seen the movie Pump Up the Volume?
I have not.
It is a 1980s film, Christian Slater, I believe, and he ends up being an advice guy. And because he moves to the middle of nowhere, and there's some sort of injustice that he helps resolve. You may want to look into it. It holds up. Parts of it hold up very well. Other parts of it are dumb, but they were dumb initially. So it is called Pump Up the Volume, and it is a Christian Slater vehicle. And that's the first time I ever heard Leonard Cohen. So, yeah, because he also played some music. The soundtrack is amazing, quite honestly. Matt Kirshen, Myq Kaplan, you guys should know this. It's been an hour.
Okay.
You're doing some vital work here. We're hoping that the audio that we're all recording separately will be compiled by Patrick Brady and be made beautiful. But thank you so much for doing this show.
Thank you so much for having me.
thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to both of you. Can I say one last quick thing that just occurred to me? Based on what Matt just said about, how fiction and these letters can be like dipping into a world that is not our own world. It can have application to it, but it needn't. It can be for entertainment. It can be for utility. But it's sort of like, those would you rathers? Like I had these, this old book of would you rather do this horrible thing or this horrible thing? You must choose. You quote unquote must choose. And then sometimes I just be looking at them and be like, I don't accept that. I do not want to choose either of these. And I don't have to. You can't tell me what to do, book. Close it. So I'm glad that sometimes looking at the advice column information, I'm like, oh man, I'm glad. Do I have to say something? Do I have to tell people what to do? Do I have to live this life? Thank goodness I do not. And also, the advice columnists don't have to either, because they do get to decide what questions they air on their podcast or include in their column. And they don't want to have a column full of, I don't know, that is a tough one every week.
All right, Rangers, let me just say that you have been listening to Myq Kaplan, Myq Kaplan, and he has a new album out. It's going to be out May 8th, available for order April 17th. A.K.A. is the name of it, and he's at Myq Kaplan on Instagram and Twitter. Matt Kirshen, spelled like Matt Kirshen, Kirshen, and he has a podcast called Probably Science that you should probably find. And thank you so much for doing the show. And Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat, my hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?